this to me is like the really fascinating material.
We don't know what the answer is, but we're looking for patterns.
I think we're looking at kind of a type of cosmic alchemy.
The story slowly
But still, a lot of people don't know that this technology actually exists.
The possibilities here are pretty mind-boggling.
We can't just believe that it was the work of these lone troubled individuals.
Like a conspiracy theorist would look at that and say, well, the Illuminati or somebody planned this right
Now,
away
is that
in advance.
or is that by design?
Very interesting book, very interesting concepts. Do you don't consider yourself intelligent design, but you don't consider yourself kind of like a religious?
Well, I think if you have a chance to get through the book, you'll see that I'm not.
Yeah. I've looked ahead into some of the religion stuff, but just to give people kind of an idea of where you stand, because
Right.
everybody like looks at intelligent design, this concept, and they say that, well, that's a religious thing, that has so many religious aspects, and it's looked at, I think, unrightly so, negatively for the most part.
Yes, that creates a difficulty for me because I'm neither in the evolutionist, materialist camp or the religionist camp. So where's my audience?
Yeah.
But the objective is truth, and if that's where the truth leads us, that's where it leads us. But as you see, as I go forward in the book, I mean, I deconstruct evolution, then I deconstruct religion, and then I get into a discussion of what is reality, what is consciousness, what is one of the things that happens as I get through the evolution chapters. You'll see that there's incredible evidence that there's some kind of incredible intelligence behind our existence. But then I get into consciousness and mind outside of matter, and life beyond death, and what does that mean? Why is there evil in the world? Given that there is a creator, why would evil be permitted, and so forth? So there's hope in the message too, but first you've got to deconstruct the falsehoods, namely evolution and religion, before you can pave the way to get into and open your mind to seeing these other things that seem weird if you're holding these other beliefs.
What is your background? Because I've done a little bit of research on you. I know that you're a nutritionist, but what is your background? My undergraduate was in biology and chemistry. Then I got a doctorate in veterinary medicine. Then I transitioned into nutraceuticals, nutrigenomics, nutrition, and so forth. Okay. So, I mean, having that background in veterinary medicine, a background in chemistry, I mean, you feel like you have some, you're not totally untrained in this, like in this kind of field, like biology.
No, I think that's really helped me sort through the information. And of course, school is just the beginning. Most of education begins after that.
I agree with that.
If you're a curious sort of person, and that's where I think I really did my learning. But I mean, I'm glad I had this scientific, medical, biological background that gives me confidence in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. But once you get out of school, that doesn't mean that learning ceases. I think I've learned more since I've been out of school than I ever did in it.
For sure. Yeah.
So, you talk about a concept, and I noticed that this is a theme in some of your other books. Looked at the back of the book, and you have your other books listed. But this concept of as if thinking matters. And can you define that, and also how that applies to looking at or like disproving evolution?
Sure. I mean, I think that you have to start from somewhere if you're going to try to answer the big questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? And most people just go with prevailing opinion or what their parents taught, and I mean that's really not the way to find truth. I think what a person needs to do is really tap into their own reasoning powers, and basically I think truth is evident to us, each one of us, and we don't have to consult a guru or a stone tablet that was etched on in the Bronze Age, or some expert or authority and so forth. All of us have it within us, the ability to determine truth.
Well, let's get into what you talk about in the book. This was interesting to me, about thermodynamics and biogenesis and chemistry. And
right.
You start off simple. I mean, the two laws of thermodynamics, basic laws. But let's talk about how we could start kind of building this case against evolution or natural selection evolution with just the laws of thermodynamics. So how does that work?
Okay. Well, just to preface that, I just wouldn't want your listeners to think that getting into these what would sound to be pretty esoteric scientific fields are something that they need to get a real grip on to come to any kind of conclusion about evolution versus intelligent design. I think that, again, a person just needs to reach within to their own reasoning power, look about them at the natural world and their own experiences, and they can make determinations that way. But just to go through some examples of, well, let me back up again and say, first of all, evolution is touted to be the scientific explanation for how we got here. And basically, you can't hear anybody anymore who does not seed their conversation, particularly if they're talking about science, with the word evolution. I mean, you could easily substitute in God, and no meaning would be lost. But it's just kind of the default setting for so many people. And so, if that's the case, then there should be good science proving it. So all we have to do is just go to what we know about nature and about reality and see whether real science, whether evolution accords with that, or it points to an intelligent causation behind all of this that we see around us. So just start very simply. There's a law in science called the law of biogenesis. The law of biogenesis simply states life can only come from pre-existing life. It's a very simple takeaway from that. And that law was put in place because way back when, people used to see bugs and worms and so forth coming out of the ground or out of piles of manure, and they were thinking that if you just let this kind of material just sit long enough, that life would spontaneously emerge out of it. And then guys like Pasteur and Reddy and Spallanzani disproved it by taking the manure and pasteurizing it, or killing anything that could possibly be in it. And then they just let it set and nothing comes out of it. And so they discovered that the only reason that life comes out what is apparently inorganic or lifeless matter is because there's pre-existing life there in the form of larvae or microbes or eggs and so forth. So again, that law in itself proves that we are not the mere product of atoms mixing together, because that law has never been proven false. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you see how that applies? See, evolutionists have to get back. They can't just talk about. We'll get into that in a moment. They can't just talk about how that animals change color or things about fossils, and they got stories about how eyes begin with ancient eye spots and creatures and things like. They got to get back to the very beginning. And
right.
Where did life come from in the first place? And they're going to say, well, you know, if you mix atoms together long enough, you're going to get some amino acids, and then amino acids are going to form proteins, and then you're going to get the components of nucleic acids like DNA and RNA, which would be the different components of those.
Which is an extraordinary complex structure when you really sit down and think about it.
Right. So the point is that, you know, but their thinking is that all happens spontaneously, that it's within the nature of matter to basically have life emerge out of it. But they have not a shred of proof. Nothing. They have never, in hundreds of years, in trying to create life, you know, in a test tube, they have never been able to do it. Even with all of the intelligence that they can bring to bear on it in a laboratory, they cannot create life out of inorganic elements or just the basic components of life. So, you know, how is that a scientific conclusion that therefore life comes out of inorganic life? It's not. You know, what is science is that life requires pre-existing life.
Well, what's funny about that to me is that when they're trying to, like, I believe that have made amino acids, but even then it's taking an intelligent being such as a human to do all that. It's not just happening by like a random chance. I mean, the people are actually doing it. So even at that point, it just kind of falls down.
Right. I mean, that's I have a cartoon in my book where there's a scientist in a laboratory, and he's got all kinds of test tubes around him, and he's got an award, 50 years of dedicated research, and he's there messing around with his test tubes and that, and he says, if I can only create life here today, I'll have proven no intelligence was necessary in the beginning.
Right.
So, it just makes your point. Yeah. But again, there are scientists who work in this biopoiesis field, it's called, where they are trying to mimic, you know, early Earth conditions and get life to emerge out of it. And they have there's a experiment that was done many decades ago by Miller and Urey, where they created what they believe would be the primitive atmospheric gases and some of the other conditions that they thought were in the early Earth, and they discharged sparks in it, and they were able to get some amino acids there. Well, of course, the question is, did they really duplicate what the early environment was or not? But in any case, scientists can synthesize amino acids, but just let the amino acids sit there and then see what happens. They just sit there, or they degrade back into their original components. And the other thing is that the amino acids in life are all of a particular variety. There's each amino acid, you know, whether it's alanine or methionine or threonine, these different amino acids can exist in what are called different stereoisomeric forms, so a left-handed form and a right-handed form. Now, if you take your left hand and your right hand and you put them together like you're going to clap, you see that they match. But if you take your right hand and put it over top of your left hand, you'll see that they don't match, because one is right-handed and one is left-handed. And that's exactly what the amino acids can exist in. They can exist in either this right-handed form or a left-handed form. They're called the L form or the D form. And life only has the L form. But in any kind of experiment where you're just producing amino acids, you have the components and you put all the conditions there to have the amino acids form, you always get a 50-50 mixture of D and L. And that cannot be the precursor of life. But again, amino acid is nothing. It's hardly even a beginning. And it's certainly not anything that would make us conclude that life can come from non-life.
Right, which is what they want to believe. The primordial soup idea that somehow it just like springs forth, and there's this other idea that, I mean, is interesting to me, and like the I've forgotten the name of it, but it's the idea that panspermia, that life comes from space, but that just pushes it out even further of just saying, well, where did that come from?
Sure. I mean, it just passes off the ultimate question.
Yeah, it passes the buck, basically.
And the only reason they've done that is because guys who have really looked into this, can we create life just from inorganic elements? They've not been able to do it, so they just pass it off. But in the meantime, never ever doubt, what no one is sure about, and they just keep talking about the truthfulness and the scientific nature of evolution. And so its very first step is not scientific at all. Science is observation and repeatability.
Right. Scientific method.
We've never observed life coming from non-life, and no experiment has ever been done that would be able to repeat that. So it's not scientific. There's something, another interesting thing about when you're talking about just the chemistry and the formation of these basic molecules of life, like the amino acids, and then there's the sugars, and then there's the components of the nucleic acid, the DNA and the RNA, which would be the nitrogenous bases and the ribose sugars that are in those helixes. Those are all what are called condensation reactions. So if you take the basic, let's just go to the amino acids, and if you take the basic components of an amino acid, the carbon, the hydrogen, the oxygen, the nitrogen, and in some cases sulfur, and so forth. If you take those basic constituents and you mix them together, what would you guess that in order to duplicate the early Earth environment, what kind of a solution would you mix those amino acids in? Would you think?
I would have.
What are we made out of?
Well, water. I mean, primarily water. Yeah.
Remember the old that's another so-called proof of evolution, is that we're 70% water, and it's kind of matches seawater. So yes, you're right. So they would take those basic components and put them in water. And in fact, the argument is that life could never have arisen on this planet without water. So first of all, the Earth had to cool for 1 billion years for water to even form. And then when water formed, it's believed that these basic components, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the sulfur, the hydrogen, and so forth, got together in the water, and then they formed these amino acids. So forgetting the problem that if they did form, it would be a mixture of D and L, which would not be sufficient to cause life as we see it on this planet anyway. The reaction of those basic elements to form amino acids are what are known as condensation reactions. So if you can just picture in your mind, picture these on the left side, you can picture carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and so forth. And then they get together, and then they go to the right, and they form an amino acid, which is those things all tied together in a three-dimensional form. But you have to remember that in this whole milieu that's going on here, there's water. And one of the things that happens is when those constituents of amino acids combine to form the amino acid, they yield also water. That's why it's called a condensation reaction. Mm-hmm. So when the reaction occurs, water condenses out of it. So the importance of this is that these reactions are always reversible, and they're always going to go in the direction where there's the most ingredients. So if this is all occurring in water, the right side of the reaction, where the end product, the amino acid, forms the water, it's already going to be in a water mix. And so there's going to be a huge amount of water there. And that's going to drive that amino acid right back to its starting materials.
It's going to basically degrade, essentially.
Right, because
back to its components.
It's called the law of mass action. Yep. Whichever side of the reaction has the most mass, it's going to go the other way. It's just like if you have I don't know, if you have a lot of anything, it kind of falls down or rolls apart or comes apart and so forth. And so that's what one of the problems that you've got going on there. So even just to form amino acids, and not only amino acids, but every other constituent, every other biochemical in life, the lipids, the fats, the oils, the sugars, the proteins, the nitrogenous bases, all of these things are condensation reactions. And so in a watery milieu, they'd all go to the left, to the starting materials, not to their more complex form. Yeah. So does that take care of that? I hope we haven't lost people with the chemistry. And again, if anybody wants to understand that more completely, I've got all this information. We're putting together YouTube videos that will go through all of this, as well as podcasts that go through all of it. And then I have a book that encapsulates it all.
Nice. That's very cool. It seemed, just looking at especially like the thermodynamics section, or the idea of entropy, this idea that things decay. In other words, like just the existence of life, from what you've just described, essentially defies some of these laws. That's kind of where you're going with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just for your audience, the thermodynamics, there's several laws there, but the second law is particularly relevant here, because it basically states that things always go from order to disorder. From complexity to loss of complexity.
Yes.
And what is evolution? It's the exact opposite of this law. Yeah. I mean, you're starting with random atoms, and you end up with something like the human brain. It just, it just defies. That's common. Again, we're talking very sophisticated thermodynamics. If anybody wants to go on the internet and just look up thermodynamics and try to get into the mathematics and so forth involved in this, enough to give anyone a headache. But the basic takeaway is that, things go from ordered state to a disordered state. It's the reason that people can't make perpetual motion machines. There's always a degradation. Everything degrades. Mm-hmm. Don't keep your house nice and neat and tidy, and it degrades. If you don't keep your car up, it degrades. Look in the junkyard and see what happens. You don't see new Lamborghinis coming out of it. Everything degrades. The whole universe is moving toward this more degraded state where there is no hot spots, anything. Everything will be just a cold, even, dark, randomness. So just, again, this is just common sense. We see it all around us. Complex things don't spontaneously emerge out of simple things on their own. Now, the only reason that we see complex things around us, other than in nature, is because of the the injection of our intelligence, our engineering. Mm-hmm. But that, that's not something that evolutionists want to insert into their equation.
Yeah. Just as an aside, why is there this? Is it because of the animosity that religion put towards science in the beginning, and then now what science puts towards religion, that it's so hard for most people of science to accept this? Like, why is there such a stake in just saying, well, we really don't know what it is. There could be a driving force. I don't really, I guess I do understand it, but at the same time, I think that there's like, what would be the harm in admitting something like that?
Well, they think there's only two choices. Yeah. Most people think there's only two choices. You either believe in materialism and evolution, or you believe in religion. So scientists can't really bring themselves to the sorts of things that religion represents. It has nothing to do really with reason. It has to do with faith. Mm-hmm. It has a horrendous history. The Inquisitions, the witch trials, the Crusades. All you have to do is go to get on a plane these days and go through what you're going through just to get on a plane, to see the evil, that religion can do. And also religion in the past stood in the way of any kind of progress. There was a time when even that people were not even allowed to read the Bible. Just the hierarchy in the church could read the Bible, and then
for 1,000 years,
and then you couldn't translate it. Tyndale and others who did, these people were killed, because of doing things like that, and then, and interpreting the world other than through the lens of the Bible was just considered a horrendous sin. When fossils were found, they were thought to be just kind of God's playthings. They weren't even recognized for what they are, because the argument was that there could have been no death before Adam and Eve, so there could have been no fossils.
Yeah.
And you've got guys who have calculated that, that according to religion that the Earth is 4,000 years old, and mm-hmm. that's all done by going through genealogies in the Bible and so forth. But we can get into religion later on. But I think the main problem here is that most people think I either have to believe in materialism, evolution, and atheism and agnosticism. That's kind of a group, if you will, or I have to believe in some kind of religious nonsense. And since people can't get into the religious nonsense thing, they think that they're thinking people, they stay in the materialistic, evolutionary, atheistic side. And so I think that's the main reason. But a lot of people, because we're schooled from the earliest biology class that kids get in grade school, they're indoctrinated with evolution, and then into high school, and then into college, and then people scientists are in a position career-wise, if they're in academics, or no matter where they are, I guess if they were to argue something other than evolution, they just would be persona non grata. So there's that kind of pressure as well. But people don't realize that there's a third option, and that is secular creation, that we are the product of an intelligence, but it has nothing to do with religion. one of the ways I wrap my head around this is that, okay, so what is this intelligence, or what is this whatever? And then I have to stand back and humbly admit certain limitations. I know that, in the way I look at it, is I know infinity exists, but I cannot comprehend it. I mean, I know in time, it seems like, that infinity has to be able to go both ways. In distance, it seems like it can go both ways. In bigness and smallness, it can go both ways infinitely. Now, I can't comprehend that. So if that's a reality that I know exists, infinity, and I can't comprehend it, why should I believe that I should be able to comprehend the intelligence that was responsible for creating this incomprehensible complexity in the universe and in the human body and everywhere we look? It's, the complexity of life is just so staggering. There's just no way to think about it other than there's got to be some kind of intelligence behind it. I can get into that a little bit more in terms of what are the features that we see around us that actually point to an intelligence. But let me just touch on a few other like disproofs of evolution, if you will. One is,
because I was going to ask you about the fossils too, about some of the problems with them. Yeah.
Now we know DNA is responsible for the information that codes our bodies. All of our physiology and anatomy and so forth. And DNA is basically a 4-letter language, and it's equivalent, like the DNA in our bodies is equivalent to 3 quadrillion average-sized books. In other words, if you put stacked up books on shelves like you see them in a library, and you took that shelf and you ran it to the sun, you'd have to make 50 trips to the sun to contain the amount of information in the DNA that codes for us.
That in and of itself is incomprehensible.
Yeah, and what we know for sure is that information, meaningful information that creates something that's functionally complex, cannot come by chance. I mean, it just never happens. If you have any information and you randomly disrupt it or change it, it only degrades, it never improves. If you have random words, or you have a bag full of words or a bag full of letters, you shake them up, you're not going to get information out of that. Information requires an information giver. It's interesting how that with regard to DNA and just its complexity, computer scientists are worried about the amount of information that is accumulating and how they can store that. And they within short order here, they're not going to be able to even build a building big enough to hold the computer storage capability of the information that's accumulating in our world. And so they've been looking at DNA, and 1 teaspoon of DNA would hold all the information that man has created up to the year 2011 from the Greeks, all the way from the Greeks up to 2011. That includes all the Facebook entries and the photos and everything. All that information could be contained in 1 teaspoon of DNA.
It's amazing.
How does something like that come into existence just by mixing atoms together? It's just so impossible. And talk about possible. One of the things that I've got a chapter in the law of impossibility. And I'm going to talk here about just ones with zeros after them. There are 1 followed by 80 zeros atoms in the entire universe. So the way that you would denote that in easier terms, we say 10 to the 80th. So there's 10 to the 80th atoms in the entire universe. Now, the universe is believed to be about 17 billion years old. That would be 10 to the 17th seconds. Okay?
Okay.
So if you can just wrap your mind around that for a moment, just that there's
Right,
10 to the 80th
right.
atoms. Okay? Okay, now then, to create just the simplest protein and DNA, and incidentally, DNA cannot come into existence without the existence of enzymes, which are proteins, because enzymes are necessary to link up the letters of DNA. So you need both proteins or enzymes and DNA to even have the basic rudiments of life, even though that still would not be life. And the chance of that coming together would be 10 to the 168th. One chance in 10 to the 168th. And Sagan argued that the chance for a simple cell, in other words, you've got the DNA and you've got all the organelles and mitochondria and everything else within the cell, he said the chance of a simple cell coming into existence by chance would be 10 to the 2 billionth. That would be 1 followed by 2 billion zeros.
Jeez.
That's the odds of that happening. Now, the law of impossibility is that people who work in this area in terms of probability have calculated a thing called the universal probability bound. And the most generous number for that would be if something is more improbable than 1 in 10 to the 150th, it's impossible. But yet, I just got through telling you that a simple cell is 1 chance in 10 to the 2 billionth. So you can see that that creates a very difficult problem, because 10 to the 150th, 1 chance in 10 to the 150th would be like you going to the local 7-Eleven and buying a lottery ticket every day and winning every time for the next 1,000 years, every day. That's the kind of odds we're talking about.
That would be nice.
Yeah, so, yeah, it would be nice, but good luck with those odds. Eh?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And one of the
That's
things
incredible.
the other thing, getting back to thermodynamics, and evolutionists usually say, well, that didn't happen, but given billions of years, anything can happen. Well, they don't have billions of years. They've set an age for the universe of 17 billion years. And then it wasn't until the Earth was about, and then the Earth has an age of about 5 billion years. And then the Earth didn't cool enough until about 4 billion years ago, cool enough, and then water formed. But yet we have on Earth right now the very organisms that have been found 4 billion years ago, unchanged. They're in structures known as stromatolites that are found along the shores in different places, and they're simple bacteria, and they're exactly the same as they were 4 billion years ago. So someone needs to explain why they did not so-called evolve. They've stayed the same that entire time. And also, just that since the fact is that they've been dated back to 4 billion years, but that's the time when supposedly that water first appeared on the Earth. Well, most evolutionists would say you would need billions of years to even form the simplest living organism. But yet, the simplest living organism appeared at the same time that water was found on the Earth. So just no matter where you go, if you just open your mind up and aren't selective with your proofs and your evidence and so forth, you can see that it's just evolution is not feasible. It's just irrational. It's not scientific. There's absolutely no proof for it whatsoever. So would you like to talk about, maybe we could talk about mutations a little bit, just that people think that the way that once life formed, that the
Right.
way different. You want to touch on that, or
Because it's this whole idea with like the natural selection that there's a advantageous mutation, and then the speciation happens from there. That's basically
Right.
the Darwinian concept of evolution. But mutation has also been, it's weird because mutation is not considered a good thing. But in evolution it is.
yeah. You don't want to store nuclear waste under your bed at night, hoping for a beneficial mutation.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and mutations are carcinogenic.
Yeah.
Tumor causing. And another interesting, moment by moment, every day we experience thousands of mutations in our body. And the only reason we stay alive, and those do not all develop into various kinds of damage, metabolic damage or cancer, is because of mechanisms within the body called DNA repair mechanisms. So if you can imagine that, a string of DNA, and the letters in DNA are all lined up in a particular way, and a mutagen, a chemical, or an X-ray, or something damages the DNA, and that order, that language is damaged. There is hundreds of chemicals in a mechanism called the DNA repair mechanism that go along the DNA chains and find those areas of damage and repair them, restore them back to their original form. So the only reason we're alive is because mutations are fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And yet evolution would have us believe that we're here because of evolution. But mutations are nothing but random disruptions in information. We've already talked about information, how information cannot come into existence on its own without some intelligent input. And then once information is there, it can't survive random disruption. It degrades. The old thing where if you give a sentence to a person in a classroom, a child in a classroom, and ask them to pass the sentence around, by the end of the classroom, the sentence is nowhere near what it was when it began.
The game of telephone.
Right, pardon me?
The game of telephone. That's what you're talking about.
I'm not sure about. I don't know what that is.
You say something to someone from one point, and it goes down the line, and it's a completely different saying by the time you get to the last person.
Yep, same thing. And then selection creates nothing. It simply culls. So selection is not a creative thing at all. In order to get something new, you have to change genetic material. Now, people are going to think, well, geez, look at all the varieties of dogs, and look at how bacteria can develop resistance to antibiotics, and so on and so forth. All those kinds of things are cited as supposed evidence of evolution, but that's not evidence of evolution. It's simply evidence of the ability of organisms to adapt, to vary within the scope of their kind. They never become something other than what they are. There is a new genetic field called epigenetics, which is really quite revolutionary.
Yes.
We used to think that we were just locked into DNA, and the only way change could ever occur is if a mutation occurred. But what we found is that DNA is wrapped with these very complex carbohydrate and protein lipid conglomerations, if you will, that serve as switches that can switch parts of the DNA on and off, and that those switches can be affected by the environment, by the food we eat, and by the environment in which we are. Those switches, that epigenetic shroud, if you will, that encases the DNA, is something that adjusts to the circumstance, if you will, and then it can switch parts of the DNA on and off. But what you see happening, so in other words, creatures could change size or ability to withstand cold or heat or so on and so forth. And you can see that kind of variation around the world in different creatures of the same species, if you will, or a better term is called a syngamion. A syngamion is a creature that remains within itself. In other words, it interbreeds with itself and doesn't go beyond that. So these syngamions can vary quite a bit, but that variation does not equal evolution. It's simply the switching on and off of the genetic capability that's already within the DNA. Do you understand what I'm talking about there?
I do understand. We're not seeing a speciation. We're not seeing something from going from one species to another.
Right.
And you mentioned dogs. I mean, that's basically breeding, which is really human intervention. It's us picking and choosing the traits that we like in a particular animal.
But it's still within the DNA potential of the syngamion that they can be a Chihuahua or all the way to a Saint Bernard.
Right, but they're still the same species. They're just different shapes, different sizes.
Right.
Yes. And you don't, and I think maybe with wolves and dogs, I mean, they can interbreed. And so but they're considered different species, but are they really? That's some of our definitions of what species are. There's a lot of gray area there.
Yeah, there you go. You hit it on the button. I mean, a lot of the things have to do with just our nomenclature, what we name things. But it's clearly, as you look out in the world, you see birds of a feather flocking together, and just there is this integrity of kinds, these are called syngamions. I hate to use the word kind because that's a biblical term, and that's going to turn some people off. And a better, more descriptive term is a syngamion. So, again, one of the flaws of evolutionary thinking or tools that evolution uses way to the extreme is extrapolation. Like, for example, if they can show that moths in an urban environment that were white over time they became more gray to blend in with the sooty industrial environment, that the more gray moths survived more than the white ones. That's proof of evolution to them. That's proof that we humans came from atoms on the edge of a volcano, 4 billion years ago. All that is just, again, variation within a kind, the epigenetic switches that can turn DNA on and off. And there can be a natural selection. There's no question that variation occurs within nature, but always within bounds. You never see a new organ, a new appendage. And one of the things that you'll notice when people do describe evolution, if you ask them, well, how did wings come to be? Well, they'll say, well, first there were fish, and then the fish Their pectoral fins they started kind of walking in the shallow sea, and those fins, turned into more effective fins, so they became feet, and then you got amphibians, and then the amphibians crawled further up onto land. They became reptiles, and the reptiles became found that just jumping from tree to tree was not as advantageous as actually being able to fly greater distances. So they changed their front feet changed into wings, and that's the kind of the storybook fashion that evolutionists use to explain their hypothesis, but no detail ever. Never any step-by-step progression. When I'm talking step-by-step, an evolutionist is going to have to explain biochemically how every single atom and molecule in the leg of the reptile changed from what it was into feathers, step by step. And there's none of that ever. You only hear these kinds of stories about how things gradually changed, and it all looks very logical on the outside, but they're just stories. They're like they're just like fairy tales, unless you can put some science there, and there's no science there whatsoever. There's even there's in the scientific literature, there's I think there's a journal called the Journal of Biochemical Evolution. And there's not one example of a step-by-step progression of biochemically of anything that constitutes life. Not even a theoretical step-by-step, let alone an experimental step-by-step. As you look at your body, at any part of your body, just look close enough, a hair on your kneecap or you don't have to get into the eye or the ear or the digestive system or the heart, and
complex systems.
The pacemaker.
Yeah.
Just take one cell. There are millions and millions and millions of components in that cell that are just all interlinked like a machine. And you can't take one of those components away or the thing, perishes.
Yeah.
But
that's true.
Never has there been an explanation, step by step, how any of this stuff could come to be on its own. One biochemical reaction leading to the next biochemical reaction, and and each step being more advantageous than the previous one. Let me just, I don't know how much time we have. We're just talking about just the complexity here. Let me talk about something that's kind of neat, and I've got this on in YouTube videos if people want to visit and take a look at that. And I think my YouTube channel is As If Thinking Matters. Should get someone there. But in any case, there is let's say that you were walking on the beach, and you looked down and you saw a set of gears, toothed gears. And
yes, I was going to ask you about this, about the gears. Yeah.
Yeah, you took the two gears and you put them together, and you saw that the teeth perfectly intermesh. And then you looked over to the side and you saw a bolt with a nut that screwed on it perfectly. And would you conclude that that's something that could have come to be there or anywhere on Earth just on its own, given enough time?
I would conclude that somebody made it.
Yeah. Somebody made. I mean, that clearly has the earmarks of intelligence, without a doubt. In fact, if you go back archaeologically far enough, there in Africa there are stone tools found, and they're called Oldowan stone tools. And if you looked at them, they're just stones that are just been chipped, so that the edge has like a sharp edge. And when archaeologists find these chipped stones, they conclude there was intelligence there. with, just looking at a chipped stone, they conclude intelligence was responsible. So I'm saying if you saw gears, perfectly intermeshing gears, or you saw a bolt and a nut, certainly that would indicate intelligence. Okay, so there's a plant hopper. It's called the Issus plant hopper, and it has in its legs intermeshing gears, perfectly intermeshing gears. And in the YouTube video, you can actually see those gears intermeshing as that plant hopper leaps. And then there's a weevil, Trigonopterus, and it has in its hip joint, instead of a ball and socket like we have, it has a screw and a nut. The screw is at the head of the leg bone, and the nut is like in the pelvis of the weevil, and that screw and nut fit together perfectly. And then what E. coli is, the bacteria. You've heard about it, how it can be a...
Yes, in fact, it's been in the news recently.
You're right.
With the lettuce,
it's quite a little machine in itself. Yep. It's got it moves around by a flagellum. It's an acid-driven rotary motor, and it whips around at 20,000 times a second. So you've got, wow. I've just described, you have in nature gears that perfectly intermesh, you have nuts and bolts, and you have acid-driven rotary motors, just to begin. So if you look at those things, if you walk along the beach and you see the Issus plant hopper or the Trigonopterus weevil or an E. coli, and you look at that and you're going to say, that's far more complex than these chipped stones, and far more complex than just the gears and the nuts and bolts, because these gears and nuts and bolts are attached to organisms with nervous systems and billions of other components all interlinked with these gears and nuts and bolts. How could you possibly conclude anything other than that these were the result of intelligent intervention?
That's true. A very interesting picture that you have in the book that shows this plant hopper and what those gears look like. That's just amazing. The electron microscope picture. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, in the YouTube video, they've actually got a picture of it actually working.
Actually moving, yeah. Huh.
Yeah, actually moving. But those gears are like perfect. And if you look at each tooth on that gear, is made of millions and millions of atoms. The evolutionist has to explain how each one of those atoms got there.
Yeah.
By just spontaneous mechanisms. It simply just can't be done. It never has been done.
I wanted to ask you. Go ahead. Finish your thought on that.
No, go ahead. I don't know how. The point is that the evidence is behind. That the idea that we are a result of intelligent intervention, and evolution is certainly a false idea.
I wanted to ask you about the DNA. When they say things like chimpanzees are 97% similar to us in DNA, and that is often used now as like a way to say that we did evolve we evolved from a simpler form, basically. What's your thoughts on that? What are we dealing with?
I've got I don't have it before me, but in the book I've got a chapter called Favorite Evolution Proofs.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I address. And so they're arguing that things that are similar prove relationship. So if you're going to use that logic, things similar prove relationship, there are all kinds of ridiculous things that can come out of the amount of DNA, the amount of genes, the similarity between a banana and us is greater using this parameter, a certain parameter, than it is using the same parameter show us closer to a chimpanzee. So it's just, you can only use that argument that similarity proves relationship if you're willing to follow through and make all similarities prove relationship, but that results in just ridiculous relationships.
Yeah.
And I have that all enumerated in that chapter in the book.
Okay. This idea of the anthropic universe, what do you mean by that?
Just that everything everything kind of comes together in such a way that we survive. Just everything has to be so perfect. The moon has to be where it is, and it has to be the size it is. Jupiter has to be where it is, and it has to be the size it is. The sun has to be where it is and the size it is. We have to be, just everything is interrelated in such a way that it can't be more or less than it is, or, we could not exist. And it's if you combine, like, for example, if right now you and I are spinning on the Earth is spinning on its own axis, but the Earth is also moving around the solar system. But the solar system is also moving around the galaxy, and the galaxy is moving through the universe. If you total those speeds all up, right now we're traveling at 1.5 million miles an hour. How can that happen?
That's amazing how can to think we, about. Yeah.
how can we exist for another second? And I mean, it's just things are too perfect. It's just like our body. Nobody really understands what life is, and that's one of the things that I think that anybody who has a question about this, they should just go into a biochemistry book and just browse through it and just look at some of the biochemistry that goes on in the body. And this is only a fraction of what's really going on. It's only what's known at this time. Or go to a cytology book, which is the study of cells and all the things inside of a cell. Or a histology book and study all the things within tissues. And then study each of the organs. And all of these things are machines within machines. Inside of a cell, there are organelles like the mitochondrion. If each day the mitochondrion is responsible for producing energy, the ATP molecule. And each day, those mitochondria in our body produce our body weight in ATP. If they stopped working, we could survive for about 15 seconds. But for that mitochondrion to work requires millions of other components, all integrating constantly, relentlessly, practically without error in order for us to survive. So just each breath we take, each heartbeat we have, is such a testament that there is so much more going on than just atoms bumping together.
Yeah, very true. In the time that we have left, I want to talk to you a little bit about this evolution, the impact on our society. What, because you do list some negative consequences from this belief about evolution.
Well, for just apropos for your program and your audience is how that evolution, the notion that we just spontaneously came to be on this planet as a result of just natural law and matter, kind of stands in the way of really opening your mind to the idea that we are something other than matter, that consciousness is something outside of our brains, that the brain is not us, that our consciousness exists separate and apart from us, and therefore can exist after we die. Those things are just hard for an evolutionist or a materialist to get a handle on, because they just think that everything is reducible to atoms, that we're just biological robots. And yet, just the existence of free will, the fact that during the course of a day we have free will and can choose, and good and bad and so on and so forth, that the existence of free will cannot be explained by atoms, and yet the evolutionists and materialists would say that the brain is the explanation for us in our entirety. But yet, if you break the brain down far enough into its neurons, and then into its cellular components, and then into its biochemicals, and ultimately into its atoms, those atoms simply obey natural law. They don't have free will. All atoms, behave in a particular way that's dictated specifically by natural law. So atoms don't have free will. So neither do molecules have free will. So how on earth do we have free will? So that speaks to the notion that we are other, that something above and beyond that. And I'm just pointing out here how that materialism and evolutionists locks us into an entirely different mindset that doesn't allow us to see the obvious. And in medicine, for example, evolution, the evolutionary idea, the materialistic evolutionary idea, just assumes that the body is just matter made up of a variety of chemicals, so that we can add to or delete with impunity, without consequence. And we can see right now the modern medical paradigm is pretty much guided by evolutionary materialistic view, where they basically try to force the body with drugs and pharmaceuticals into submission. And as a result, we spend more on medicine in this country than any other place in the world, but yet we're like 60th in the world in terms of health. Mm-hmm. So it's just the materialistic view just is and the other thing is that it's pretty hard to derive any kind of morality or ethics out of evolution. True. Because evolution is ultimately survival of the fittest.
Yeah, that is true.
Might makes right. So how do you ever develop any sort of notion of right and wrong out of that? There isn't anything right and wrong. I mean, we are just a biological robot here for a time, and then we're gone, and that's it. We return to just the atoms. So does that kind of answer your question? I mean,
it does.
It basically pervades everything. It pervades politics. It pervades religion to a degree. For those, even some religions have adopted evolution into their thinking, and I can't. I think one of its most striking, or it's close to home effects, is just on health and the way that modern medicine treats health problems as just a material matter, and not something that is requires a more holistic approach.
And we also got there were also ideas like social Darwinism and eugenics. These ideas had a very negative effect on the 19th and 20th centuries. And we're still dealing with that legacy. We really are.
Right. Yeah. That's because bad ideas create bad consequences. Whereas on the other hand, if we just reach within, like I mentioned at the beginning of all this, in order to come up with answers to these big questions, where did we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? You use reason, you use evidence, you look at natural laws, and you use intuition. And then each of us have within us conscience. And somehow that has been implanted in us, that we all intuitively know right from wrong. We don't need religion. We don't need a holy book to tell us right from wrong. In fact, if you ask any person in religion if they can describe anything within their religion that any ethical thing within their religion that they could not derive from their own conscience, they'll be unable to do it. You know, it's within each of us. So that's I think another testament that we are created things. We're here with an innate sense of right and wrong, and our purpose is to listen to that voice and to try to live it.
So, do you still have the cat that you write about in the book?
Oh yes. In fact, I had to make sure we're pretty cold here where I am right now, and I had to close him out because he's outside right now, and he kind of gets a little upset once it gets cold, and he gets pretty mouthy about it.
So what is he again? What's his?
He's a part bobcat and lynx and domestic.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a personality. He's like a person. He's like a dog. He follows you around like a dog and reacts with you like a dog. Is really quite something.
Was he bred or was he more?
Yeah, it's a specific breed. You know,
okay.
That yeah.
And see, those three animals are so close to each other, they can interbreed.
Yeah.
So, well, Dr. Wysong, go ahead.
Go ahead. I just say, but they're not becoming dogs or donkeys.
Yeah. Still remaining basically a cat, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Wysong, tell everybody where they can get the book and contact you, and please tell us where you can find the YouTube channel and where you're going to find your podcast that you're going to put out.
The best thing to do is just go to asifthinkingmatters.com.
Okay.
asifthinkingmatters.com, and on there they can find out about the YouTubes. They can find out about the podcasts. The book is described there. This latest book, the second edition of Solving the Big Questions as If Thinking Matters, is there. But as I said, you know, they don't have to spring for any money if they don't want to. I'm trying to make it all available to people free on podcasts or YouTubes, and so that's the best way. Just asifthinkingmatters.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, sir. It's been a very good interview. I've really enjoyed it. So I will now going to turn it to the second part of the show, and guys, we'll be back on Conspirinormal. Okay, we're back. It's later on in the day, and just did that interview with Dr. Wysong about intelligent design, and so that was interesting. Serfiel, you're here. We're over at Studio B again.
We are at Studio B,
and we've got Walter Bosley on the line.
Howdy, gentlemen.
Hello, sir. I realized that I have not really had you on this year, other than when I was there recording in San Bernardino, which was an interesting experience.
Yeah, it was great to see you out here. We got to, show you around a little bit. And on the 19th of this month, I went over to Cora Stanton's gravesite where I took you.
Yep.
Because it was the 103rd anniversary of her death. And so, I go there every year on the anniversary of her murder.
Yeah, so basically what we did for the audience is that when I was in California, I was there in San Diego visiting my stepson. I took 3 days and went up to the LA area, and I met up with you and Greg Bishop. And where was that, Redlands that we met up? Yeah.
And we went to out to Giant Rock.
Yes.
And Landers, where it's at in Landers, where the Integratron is, the George W. Van Tassel interesting domed structure. And then on was it the same day or it was a different day that I took you?
Yeah, that was on Friday of that week. I came back and met up with you because I was making my way back on my long trek east. So I drove back to Nashville, and I met up with you in San Bernardino.
Yeah, I think I showed you the site at the mall where her body was found, Cora Stanton. For those who don't know, the woman who's at the center of the Empire of the Whale mystery, which I write about in my books of that title.
And we stood in the parking lot, which used to be the lake.
Yes, that part of the parking lot was the south end of the lake. Hey, you know what? I was out walking the dog a little while ago, and I realized that I haven't talked about this much because I just kind of forgot about it. But it's an Empire of the Whale Cora Stanton synchronicity that you'll appreciate, I think. South of my street where I live is a kind of a small lake, large pond, somewhere in between those two. And the shape of it and its orientation and the trees that are around it make it a kind of a microcosm of that very lake that was at Arvita Springs in 1915, where Cora Stanton was found dead. And remember, she was found dead at the south end of the lake. Well, back in, I can't remember the exact year, it was after I came out with the first book, of course. It might have been somewhere around 2012 or 2013. A young lady, a local high school student, was out jogging, and she was hit by a car, hit and run, I think it was, and killed. And it was right there at the south end of that small body of water just south of my house. And for the longest time, friends and family would leave candles and a little shrine for where it had happened. And it dawned on me after about, a few times, because I would do my 2.5 mile walk every day, and I would go right past it. And I realized, wow, there's kind of a weird synchronicity there in that, this young lady was killed, but I'm pretty sure it was a hit and run. I don't think they got the person or whatever. So she's unkilled by someone who remains unknown. She's killed by someone who remains unknown at the south end of this little small lake. I saw the parallel there, the synchronicity.
When was that? What year was that?
I'm thinking either 2012, 13, maybe 14.
Okay.
It was somewhere around there. Around, not it was before the 100-year mark, but it's the idea that a young woman, killed in that juxtaposition to that body of water, just kind of south of where I live. Considering, what I wrote about and just a little synchronicity there.
You don't think there's something more sinister to it, or just a strange synchronicity?
Well, the way people drive like complete a-holes.
I did get to experience that in California. Yes.
Yes. In this neighborhood in particular, overtly nothing sinister, but this is an example of how that fabric that's underneath everything works. So if you want to look for something sinister, you have to say, is the sinister aspect, which there could very well be, is the sinister aspect to be found in that it would happen as a synchronicity to what I had written. Now, you got to be careful with that, because, people can drive themselves nuts with thinking, would this have happened where I lived? Is this following me? Is really, when you ask something sinister, you're kind of asking, is something or someone following you making these things happen? And you could argue that, but you have to be careful of that kind of thing, because it can drive somebody nuts. And so you're getting into the aspects of this fabric of reality where, okay, some people believe that we have a finite period here in our lives, and when it's our time to go, it's our time to go. And someone might argue that for whatever reason, this young lady was allotted a very short time in this life, and she was going to go, whether it was there or by some other unfortunate means. And the thing that really controls synchronicity just arranged things to where her defined time to go would just happen to fit within a synchronicitous juxtaposition that I would notice. Okay, so in other words, it's not like something is saying, let's make bad, sinister things happen to him because he's poking his nose in this. It's not like, I caused it in some karmic way. It's just that whatever, and I do believe it is an intelligence, whatever intelligence weaves the fabric of reality that we all live in for their own various reasons, they make these things happen.
Interesting you say that, because that was kind of the theme of the previous interview that's going to be the first part of this show. So
okay, good.
We were talking about this kind of
excellent
infinite intelligence with Dr. Randy Wysong. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I wasn't, but he's got some interesting ideas about intelligent design.
That kind of reminds me of some of like the Lilly ideas of the Earth Coincidence Control Office and stuff like that.
Or the Valis, like Philip K. Dick.
Yeah. Before we get into like talking about some of the books and stuff, what really got you started in your life thinking, I guess for lack of a better word, more like synchro-mystically about just events in your life and putting together these puzzles and research topics?
Actually, before we get to that,
okay,
I wanted to remind Walter of something. Do you remember, Walter, when we were at Cora Stanton's grave, that there was a near accident right in front of the cemetery? Like, yes. I even got you remarking on it on the podcast. Like, we heard just sirens going, and so I just thought that was an interesting synchronicity.
Oh yeah. Like something, kind of reminding you that it's there, and anything can happen. It's out of your control. Yeah, that's the way it is. So ask the question again.
What personally really got you started in thinking synchro mystically? And it seems like the things you're researching, things in your life, pull you into answers. How did that all kind of start for you? What got you thinking like that?
One Sunday morning in December of 1979, I woke up and something was different. I lifted my hands up. I looked at them, and my first thought was, these are not my hands. These are not the hands I'm used to. I turned and looked at the wall, and I saw a texture that I hadn't really noticed before. I got up, walked through the house. I saw my sisters, and there was this weird detachment between myself and them, and I recognized them as, the role of my sisters, but I felt no real, it was as if I was kind of surprised to see them there. And then same with my mom. I went into the kitchen and my mom was there, and I was like, whoa, there's my mom. And from that moment forward, my life was never the same as it was up all the years up until I went to bed that night before. And the high strangeness various incidents, from deja vu, when I would look in some people's eyes, I would see this illumination that I wouldn't see in everybody's eyes. I would sense a recognition in some people, that deja vu kind of thing. The lucid dreaming, with the parts that would come true over the course of 20 years. The one time I was reading a novel, okay, and there was something described in this novel that startled me so badly. I saw it so vividly. It was as if I was recognizing it, and I literally threw the book across the room and had to get out of my room and go outside because I didn't want to hyperventilate. There was something in there in that book. And interestingly enough, the book was The Talisman by Stephen King and Peter Straub, in which a young kid learns to flip into an alternate dimension that coexists with our own, the one that we all know. And there are images in that book that I recognized and seemed deeply familiar to me. And it scared me. So it began to accumulate just all sorts, any manner of weirdness that had happened before my uncle, my mentor, got a hold of me and taught me about even more strange things, while at the same time recruiting me to go work for Uncle Sam. And things continued to get weird under his tutelage. And then, of course, it didn't necessarily stop when I started working for the government. And I really credit that morning in December of 1979 with the really being the start of what you're asking.
How old were you at that point?
I had just turned 16 in early October of that year, so I was just 16 for a couple of months.
Well, something we've never talked about on this show is your experience in Disneyland. We've actually never discussed this.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
Not on this show. Okay. Adam Gorightly mentioned it early on, like in an episode, and said your name, and I heard you on Darkness Radio, and that's when I contacted you, and I didn't put two and two together that you were the same guy he was talking about. We've never actually talked about it. Yeah.
Really? That's amazing. That's should we now, or
absolutely.
You want to?
Yeah.
Well, it's
really. I don't think
Serfiel's
heard. I don't know if he's heard this story or not.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It's really very simple. It became weird with time, as I and boy, that's a loaded statement right there. I just said it became weird with time. You can say that again, Walter. It became weird as things revealed themselves over the years. But essentially, in 1981, I went to Disneyland. Now, for those of you who didn't grow up in Southern California, okay, and aren't, even for those who have grown up in Southern California, but are not in my age range, okay, there was a time, children, long ago, when you could go to Disneyland on a Wednesday, particularly during the school year in particular, that I was just redundant there, particularly in particular, and not experience a huge crowd from the minute it opens till it closes. That you could walk around the park, particularly after about 7 or 8 at night. You could be walking through the back areas of Disneyland and maybe see one other person. I mean, that's unheard of today. Okay, even at 11 o'clock or midnight when they're getting ready to close, it's just too packed. But back then, they also were still selling the A through E ticket books, the multi-ticket ticket books. And for those who don't know the significance of that, Disneyland used to operate on these multi-ticket books where A through E, the E tickets were the best rides. That was Pirates of the Caribbean. That was, eventually Space Mountain. That was the Matterhorn. That's where we get the phrase, a real E ticket ride, which was popular about 10 years ago. That's where that comes from. Yeah, you'd go to Disneyland, and the E-tickets were the ones you got the fewest of, and they were the most coveted. Now, A, of course, was the simple stuff like the horse and carriage ride down Main Street, or I think It's a Small World was an A ticket. A or B, not much higher than that, or not higher than those two, I think. And at the same time, though, they started selling what was called the Disneyland Passport. Now, this is important in the story. That's why I'm setting it up. So my friends and I think we might have had a day off from school, or we went after school because I was a senior. And so I got out of school at like 1 o'clock. And if I recall, all my friends that went with me were either seniors or had gotten out the year before. So we go to Disneyland on a Wednesday early in the year. I'm for some reason, I'm thinking February, but I'm not sure of the month now. And around 9 o'clock p.m., in the 9 o'clock hour, we decided to go ride the carousel. Now, we would buy these passport tickets that I was getting to. They would sell the A through E ticket books, but then they would sell the unlimited passport ticket. And you would usually just, instead of getting it messed up by crumpling it in your pocket and keep pulling it out, most people would buy like a character pin. I bought Donald Duck. And you'd pin it to your shirt. So you could just, as you approach the ride, they could see your passport ticket and on you went. Okay. So we all got these passport tickets because, you know, native Southern Californians would come here a lot. It's just easier than dealing with the ticket books. And it was worth the money, which was a lot cheaper back then than it is today. So in the 9 o'clock hour, we decided to ride the carousel. And we're on the carousel. And as we're going around, I noticed an old man. Snow white hair, kind of close cropped, a close trimmed, you know, neatly trimmed beard, and a black suit, white shirt, no tie. I remember he was wearing no tie. And he was just standing there. If you know the layout of the park, he was standing on the pathway between Dumbo, which is at the northern end of Fantasyland, and Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, which is at the 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock position, obviously to the east side there of Fantasyland. And, you know, we go around 2 or 3 times, and there's this old man standing there. And I would place him at about 70 is, you know, my guess. And that's what I thought at the time, you know. And then when we come around again after a few times, he's not there anymore. So I thought, oh, okay. You know, I just happened to notice this old guy. And we get off the carousel, and we proceed to go along the direction in that path where I saw the old man standing. And it takes you back to where the spinning teacup ride is and Alice in Wonderland, and then towards the Matterhorn. And there, sitting on a bench in the area of the Matterhorn, I think like under the monorail track area, was this old man. All I can remember is the gist of the conversation. I don't remember the specific script to run through, and he said and I said.
Sure.
And for the life of me, I cannot remember his voice. Keep that in mind. I cannot remember his voice. But
so you don't remember an accent or anything?
That's right. I don't remember an accent or anything. So I felt compelled, and I had 2 friends with me. I felt compelled to strike up a conversation with the old man. It was like he was sitting there waiting, you know, for me to approach. And at this point, remember, I'm 17 years old. So I strike up a conversation with him, find out this is his first time that he's ever been to Disneyland. He has only, I think, like 2 A tickets left in his ticket book. And his demeanor is such that he's just amazed at the place. You know, it's his first time there, but you would have thought he'd never even seen anything like Disneyland. He was just wide-eyed and like a kid. And he was just, you know, really chatting, talking. He said his name was Alfred. We introduced ourselves. He said his name is Alfred. And, you know, it was about 9:30. So I suggested we go on It's a Small World with him, because we looked at his ticket book and, you know, of all the things that he had left to ride, and he hadn't been on Small World. So we go ride It's a Small World with him. And he's just totally, you know, most of us make fun of It's a Small World because it's the actual first ride that Disney created. He created it for a World's Fair, I think in 1964. And it was movable. You could take it apart and transport it. But it was Disney's first attempt at a ride. And it has a cheesy charm to it. But this guy was like, oh, my gosh, this is really cool and amazing. So we get off the ride. And like I said, it was about 9:30, 9:45-ish around there. And I just felt compelled, here's a nice old man. I come here a lot to Disneyland, been there a lot. And I thought, it'll be nice. The park's going to be open still for a little while. So I take my passport off my shirt and I pin it onto the lapel of his jacket, his coat. And you would have thought I'd given him a pot of gold. He was so grateful. I mean, it was not quite ridiculous grateful, but it was, I said, hey, the park's going to be open for a little over an hour. With this ticket, you can go ride whatever you want as many times as you want till the park closes. And he thanked me and it just so profusely. And, we parted ways and he went back towards Fantasyland and just we lost sight of him as he got deeper into Fantasyland. And my friends and I, we went on our way to Tomorrowland. Isn't that interesting? He returns to Fantasyland. And of course, we go on to the rest of our lives, our future, but it's symbolized by the fact that we went to Tomorrowland. I find interesting symbolism and things like that. And, we just spent the rest of the evening, feeling like, oh, I did something nice for an old guy. And I thought that was the end of it. Well, it nagged me. It stayed with me. Increasingly, I couldn't help but think there's something about that old man that there's something there. There was more to this than I'm realizing or that I'm seeing. And let's see, about 11 years later, I'm in Manhattan and I'm working for the FBI. It's 1992, of course. And I go to the bookstore, the Coliseum bookstore. I don't know if it's still there. It used to be down by Columbus Circle. It was within walking distance of where I was working for the FBI and kind of undercover. So I go to our favorite section, UFOs and weird stuff. And I find this book. Okay. And my only exposure to the concept of ley lines, which now I came to understand as world grid telluric currents, but we'll use the colloquial term ley lines just to keep it simple. My only exposure to ley lines before that had been in the mid-late 80s when I had read that these guys who were studying strange phenomena were the first to make a correlation between the intersections of world grid ley line energy, okay, and UFO sightings, hauntings, Sasquatch, the whole thing. And I remember in the mid to late 80s, this was like an amazing analysis these guys had done. I can't remember who they were. And that was the only thing I knew about these so-called ley lines in this world grid current that really jumped up on my radar. So here I am looking at this book, and it seems to be about, ley lines. It's called The Old Straight Track, and it's published in 1928, right? And I'm looking at this and going, oh, this is interesting. This is like that stuff, those guys who did the UFO and other phenomena correlation. And I'm saying, let's see, 1928. Oh, the author is Alfred T. Watkins. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Nothing jumped out at me yet. So I open up this book, and inside there's a photograph of Alfred T. Watkins. And I was just slack-jawed because there I am looking at a photograph of the man I met at Disneyland in 1981. Okay. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. This is Alfred. And the guy told me his name was Alfred, but this is him. But I'm looking at this photo, and it was obviously taken in the late 1920s or around 1930. And I start, looking for, about the author or whatever. And I find that this Alfred Watkins died in 1935. So my head is spinning. I'm like, oh, what the hell? Now, remember, this is 1992, before I ever suspected anything about Disneyland that led to the writing of my book. That wouldn't come until 2006.
Right.
But here's what I found out later in 2006 and 2007 when I was researching my book. Okay? The man who physically engineered Disneyland, C.V. Wood, died the year I discovered the Alfred T. Watkins book, 1992.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, but go back to 92. I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think. So again, through the rest of the 90s and through the early 2000s, I have this weird thing that happened to me at Disneyland associated with Disneyland. And then finally in 2006, Greg Bishop and I are talking about, stuff about Disneyland on his show. We're talking about Club 33, the kind of the once more exclusive, but now if you're rich enough, anybody can pay to be a member of it, dinner club at Disneyland. And, you know, we were wondering, why do they call it Club 33? And we find out, you know, hey, Disneyland is located at the 33rd degree north latitude. Okay, isn't that interesting? Because we already knew about the phenomena between 30 and 40. This is not a new concept, you know. This idea that something weird's going on at between 30 and 40 degrees north, you know, latitude around the globe. But more and more people noticed it and have written about it. So that is what all motivated and inspired the book. And in the book, I really try to dig into, you know, what's really going on at Disneyland, what could be going on in a person's head while they're in Disneyland, and more specifically, what my experience with Alfred was.
Okay, so some questions come up here.
Mm-hmm.
Why the 33rd degree parallel is so important? Because, I mean, I may have told you this before, but there's some interesting aspects of the 33rd degree parallel. Of course, you have Disneyland there. Roswell, New Mexico is there.
Yes.
And Charleston, South Carolina, where Albert Pike started Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which of course goes up to the 33rd degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that I have heard what
the Trinity test site.
Trinity test site.
Weapon,
yes. Yep.
Yeah,
we're getting into
John F. Kennedy assassination.
Yes,
is close enough. It's 32.8 or 9.
Essentially
degrees.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mount Hermon in, well, I guess in the Golan Heights, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's in the Book of Enoch. That's where the Watchers came to Earth.
Well, also
is another
Cairo and the Great Pyramid.
I believe so. Yeah.
Also in that zone.
I believe that's true.
Yeah. And it is a zone. It is a zone. Yes, the 33rd degree has interesting things, but you know, there's other degrees. But a lot of this, you know, it's between 30 and 40 that there's something very interesting going on.
Yeah.
Around the globe, definitely.
Yeah, Mount Hermon is at the 33rd degree, 24 minutes, 58 seconds north.
That widens the scope a little bit as far as 30 to 40, because I know a lot of like the James Shelby Downard stuff. He's kind of stretching it sometimes. It's not exactly 33rd parallel, but
right.
If you extend it like that, then I think that fits in.
Yeah, when you're talking, you know, land, you know, territory around a planet. Okay, when you're at 32 and a half or higher, you know, 32.5, 32.8 or whatever, you're getting into the influence zone of the 33rd degree, you know, because it doesn't necessarily, it's not like, you know, when you're painting a wall and you got tape along the molding that you don't want to paint, and then after you painted, you peel that tape up and you go, whoop, see where the colors, the two colors, there's a line between them. This energy will not go beyond that line. You're going to get some spill, you know, a little spillover on these lines that we identify. So, yeah, but people have to remember that the first time I ever heard about this phenomenon was not specifically that it was at 33 or now, you know, we're going to talk about the guy who's done, you know, 37. It is actually between 30 and 40 degrees. And that was, I think the first time I heard about that was at least 20 years ago. The concept's been out there.
A zone of weirdness, essentially, and esotericism it comes up in as well. So yeah,
which probably has everything to do with energies and the things that we can do with these energies.
Yes, back to the telluric current, right? So I wanted to ask you about this because I heard an interview with Chet Zukowski on another podcast, and he's been talking about the 37th degree parallel, which has a lot of strange things going on there as well. I mean, you've got cattle mutilations, UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings. This is also, I believe, in the area of the Four Corners, which has a lot of strange incidents happening there,
right,
as well.
I haven't done it, and I don't recall if I came across it before, but the question we have to ask is this 40 to 30 degrees north latitude not a temperate zone, with nice temperate weather and climate and this, that, and the other? We got to ask ourselves, what is the population of the Earth? What's the percentage of it that lives within this 40 to 30 degrees north latitude zone? Because a lot of the weird things that people do, that we can point to people doing in this zone, could simply be because that's where the people are. So therefore, if there's people, a number of them who are doing weird things, well, naturally, it's going to fall within that zone, right? We have to ask that question. And that's aside from the business with the energies and what energies they're tapping into. But you follow me? We kind of we kind of have to ask that. Is there a higher instance of weirdness there simply because there's more people there to do weird things?
And then is there a parallel? Because what we're talking about is 30 to 40 degrees north. Is there a parallel to the 30 to 40 degrees south? Yeah,
and I've never looked into that, to be honest.
Yeah.
I did the Disneyland book, and when I was following up on that, I kind of got led into something else, that Empire of the Wheel thing, and I haven't. But you know what? Since you asked that question, I think it's something that should be looked into, and I would have thought I've done it. I would have done it because 3 or at least 2 of my 3 secret missions books, and the 4th one here soon, deal with South American ancient mysteries and things. So maybe I will address that in the new book after all, but I haven't yet.
And also too, I'm looking at the Four Corners area. It's the intersection of approximately 37 degree north latitude with a 109 degree west longitude. So like it's those where those state boundaries are drawn is actually is the 37th degree parallel.
Oh,
and that reminds me that in that area, I mean, you've got all these ancient sites too, like the Mesa Verde, which I went to a few days after I left California.
And you've got the Sangre de Cristo Mountains near there, right?
Yep.
Or is that in 33?
I don't know. Serfiel may know. We know that Jornada del Muerto is out there, right?
Jornada del Muerto.
Yeah. I got to visit a little stretch of that with my good friend and associate who hosts the little New Mexico gatherings that I have been on a few times with Joseph Farrell, Greg Bishop, John. Oh gosh. Why am I doing a brain dump? Why am I 55 years old? John Brandenburg. I'm sorry, John Brandenburg. He's been on one of those with us, and a couple of times we've gone out there, and our host has shown us, okay, this is the Jornada del Muerto, this section of it, and that section of it. We pull out a map to see exactly where we are. Interesting area. Trinity's out by there, of course.
What was the significance, Serfiel, for Downward with those mountains?
Something about the Three Sisters or something. I don't recall.
Okay.
That's one
Tres Hermanas, the mountain range.
Yeah, Three Sisters.
That probably goes back to Macbeth too. There's a lot of
I think it has something to do with that.
Yeah.
Well, Christopher O'Brien has written some real interesting weirdness about those mountains, and there's one particular guy, a mountain man. I never remember his name. I see the photo of him in my head right now, and I don't have the book handy. But the mountain man in the 19th century who there were some brothers who were on a murder spree, and he had to go. They were of one of the native cultures near there, and he went out as a bounty hunter to go, bring them in. And he had apparently an experience out there in the wilderness in those mountains that he never talked about. And he was a tough, grizzled guy, and it really got his attention, got to him deep. So it's just delicious stuff like that makes us want to go check it out for ourselves. Right?
It is the land of enchantment.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
What's your thoughts on Downard? James Shelby Downard.
I got to tell you, the essay that is co-authored with Michael Hoffman, King Kill 33. I don't know what other people think about it, but boy, oh boy, wow. There is Hecate through that whole thing. So I think much of that. I absolutely am convinced that they who pulled off the JFK assassination were doing the same kind of dark stuff, specifically associated with Hecate symbolism, as I have found in San Bernardino.
How much of that do you think is Downard and how much is Hoffman? Because that's something I'm kind of really trying to get to the bottom of. Yeah,
I think there are better scholars than I of Downard. I know that Go Rightly could probably answer that. Could offer an opinion, an informed opinion on that, where I can't. All I know is, whoever wrote what in it, there's something there. They're essentially right or correct in, somebody wove that symbolism in the actions, before, during, and after. And it's startling from my perspective. With this Hecate mystery and how I've come to know the whole Hecate thing and her, it's startling, and it's just really startling.
Wow. Yeah, the Hecate stuff I find more and more. Maybe it's just because I'm more aware of it since reading your books.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Santa Marta stuff is...
Oh, once you are introduced to her...
Yeah.
You see everywhere that she's at. You can't miss her. You have to turn your back on it completely. And then even then, she won't let you turn your back completely. She will remind you every once in a while she's there.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
One thing I heard you speak about early on was the McStay family.
Yes.
That's out there in San Bernardino.
It's actually north. You have to meander to get up there through the Cajon Pass, but it's out by Apple Valley, which is north of here.
Okay. I can picture that
30
on the map.
Yeah, 30 or 40 minutes. And what it is, and this kind of talk about startling, the McStay mystery was a San Diego thing, or what they call North County, because they were living in North County. And, it's believed that they were seen down by the border. It was a San Diego thing. And when their bodies were found, where they were found, I can't put it any other way. It was stunning and startling to me because here's the thing. The exit off the freeway, that is closest, that is right across the freeway from where they were found, is not like a major cosmopolitan exit. I mean, you've just passed, you've just passed Apple Valley, Old Victorville, and you're starting into the desert. There's like a gas station there. And the exit is just kind of a quickly turning little exit onto just a desert kind of road. Okay. But I used to take that exit every time I went out to Apple Valley to take something to or pick up my now adopted kid that I talk about because she was living out in Apple Valley. So I was intimately familiar with that exit because I was on it 2 or 3 times a week. And when they announced where their bodies were found, here's the thing, you guys. It's like, because of the experience I already had with Hecate and the Empire of the Wheel, it's both you're shocked and at the same time, well, of course, that's where they found their bodies. Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the thing. The next thing I did was pull out a map that I'd already had for a few years, remember? Okay, I'd had it for years. I pull out that damn map. And sure enough, I'm looking at the lines, and where one of the lines goes through that freeway in the Apple Valley area, where it splits from one line into three, the main number of Hecate, that is where their bodies were found. Okay? Somebody, one way or another, either, I don't know if they were murdered on the spot. My guess is that they were murdered on the spot. We'll know for sure when the trial actually starts and it hits the media again. But at least their bodies were buried. But I seem to recall that I think they were probably taken out there and murdered there. Okay, all four of them. Okay, and let's remember, whoever the a-hole scumbag is who did this, murdered a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old little boy with a blunt instrument. Jeez. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Aside from all this spookery and skullduggery, you know, we're dealing with an a-hole, okay, a butthole who would do something like that, you know. But whatever the case is, this family, I'm pretty sure, were murdered on that spot, which meant on that energy. Okay, and here's what I point out about this. You know, people murder people for a variety of reasons that are relatively mundane. Okay, usually money, or because they're pissed off about something, or both. Okay, so whoever wanted, you know, the husband and the wife and, you know, dead. Okay, they killed the kids just to kill them. Whoever wanted them dead wasn't necessarily the one, you know, who had to have pulled, you know, beat them over the head or done the deed. Okay, so if the person who wanted them dead knows nothing about this Hecate, ley line, Empire of the Wheel type magic, okay, it's very possible that they hired someone to do the killing. Now, even that killer doesn't need to know about all this dark magic stuff and the ley lines and the Hecate and this, that, and the other, okay? But what if that killer, he's a contract killer, so he does this for a lot of clients? It could be he could have some type of loose association with people who do know about this magic, okay? And let's say, for speculation, he has kind of an open deal with them, an open contract with them. Hey, Mr. So-and-so, I've got to kill this family. Is there any particular place you want it done? Okay, because let's say they pay the hitman a little extra. You know, he gets paid by the person who wants the people dead. But let's say he gets paid by this other group that does know about the magic. Okay, let's say he gets paid by them to kill his targets in a specific spot. He doesn't care about the magic. He don't give a crap. It means nothing to him, except if they want them killed in a dirt hole out in the middle of the desert in this exact latitude, longitude spot, he's going to do it because they're going to give him $50,000. Okay? So I lay up that scenario that even if whoever gets convicted of wanting them dead and, you know, whatever, does, you know, didn't know about this magic, okay, and whoever actually did the killing didn't know about this magic, I'm arguing that there's only two possibilities after that. That somebody who knew about this magic was involved in the murders of this family and saw to it that this family was murdered on that site. Okay, that's possibility one.
I can
Number
totally
two,
believe that because
okay.
It's all ritual.
Well, no, yeah, exactly. It's all ritual. Number two, this is where it gets really spooky and weird. Number two is there could be nobody involved with this magic that was involved with this murder. Yeah. Okay? And it could be that the place drew the act.
Yes. Yes. We've talked about this kind of stuff. Yeah. I talked about this on the Where Did the Road Go? We talked about Gettysburg. I don't know if you know Tim Renner, who's going to be our next guest next week, but he lives out there in Pennsylvania. And we went to Gettysburg with him last year, and we were talking about how that it's almost like there's weird things going on in Gettysburg. Not only the ghost stuff, but you've got Bigfoot sightings and just strange lights and all these kind of strange things that are going on in that one area.
Sure.
And Tim has this thesis that the battle is happening because the armies were drawn to that spot.
The battlefield,
not the other way around.
Kind of power,
yeah. It's that is something that, since we're on this theme, this discussion has to be considered. See, and I argue this in Empire of the Wheel. It could be that in 1915, what somebody was doing with the 7 sacrificial murders, which I believe these deaths were in 1915, it could be that one of the things they were doing was priming the grid. Okay. And so what happens, what does that mean? So that for decades, a century or more after what they did is done, that means this grid of energy has been primed. It's been spiked, and it needs it wants to be fed.
Is that the same as immanentizing the eschaton? Is that...
No, but we're going back and forth between the chicken and the egg, and this is really good because a lot of people do not, well, it's either one or the other. But this is, I think, closer to what reality is.
The third possibility is that it could be both.
Yeah.
It needs to be fed. It wants to be fed, and there are those willing to feed it.
Now, if it is if it is a concentration of the former, it being some kind of ritualized, a lot of phenomenon being this kind of organized, ritualized thing. Does that relate to that down nerdian idea that might be a Hoffman idea, unfortunately, of revelation of the method, that by doing these ritualistic things and by witnessing them on a subconscious level, we give consent, which consent is the biggest part of this, proposed alchemical transformation of the psyche, I guess.
This is why he's co-host his questions like that. Just to let you know.
There's some bizarre dance that goes on between us and this thing we're talking about. It's as if there is a very old and ancient agreement between us and them, that something in our subconscious, we just say these weird things just are, and that's just the way it is. And that might be a product of a very old and ancient consent that was given that kind of continues in our subconscious. Because, here's one thing I've noticed. We have this concept of the yin and the yang, the white and the black, the give and the take, right? The concept of, and that leads to the concept of, for everything you achieve, there must be something sacrificed, right? So in my experience, and I've only done a little bit of analysis on this, it's kind of disturbing, and I'll tell you why it's disturbing after I get out the concept, is it's almost as if when you're in the Hecate zone there, that what she will do or what it does is remind you that, okay, for every step forward, for every thing you learn, something will be lost. So that something, as something else is gained, something must be lost. It's like the way of things. So one thing that you noticed is, I'll just blurt it out. The concern that you have, the thing that you come slamming into like a brick wall, okay, is the possibility, okay, if I move forward, if I gain this, if I make this next step forward and upward, who or what will die? And, it's like, okay, so you start thinking about those things like, oh my God, is my dog going to die for me to be able to? Is someone in your family or your friends going to be taken as kind of, it's like the reality, the fabric of reality, the universe demands a fee, okay? And that fee must be something sacrificed, something lost. And so, it's not something you're doing on purpose. It's just something you come running into and you realize, oh my God, is this the way it is?
Have you
and
seen-
then you begin to say, do I really want the enlightenment? Do I really want the advancement or the progress? Because if it means, this sacrifice like that, it makes it it makes things weird.
Have you seen the movie The Box?
No.
It's the movie the same guy did Donnie Darko, but
I'm familiar with that movie. Yeah.
Cameron Diaz is in it. I can't remember who else is in it, but Frank Langella shows up at this couple's house with this box.
I remember when it came out. Yes. Yeah.
Like
I remember this now.
If they open the box, they can get what they want, but somebody is going to die. That's essentially
when that exactly. And when that movie came out, I remember seeing the trailer. I remember thinking, oh man, somebody's making a movie out of this. And
sounds like one of the oldest stories there probably is. I mean,
sure. Well, when you ask your question, what was I saying? Is all this something that we as humanity gave long ago that consent to? Yeah. So that's why it's the oldest story there is, because did we consent to this system? In a way, when you think about it in terms of like reincarnation, if you get in this system where you keep coming back, or or until you advance to the point where you don't have to, whatever the case may be, in this, there are things that come with reincarnation that kind of suck, but it seems like we agree to because the other side of the coin is so worth it, or seems worth it at the time. You choose to come back.
But like a balance always has to be maintained.
A balance. Yeah. Yes, there must always be a balance.
It has to get back to an equilibrium.
Yeah, if you get this enlightenment, you got to sacrifice something, and then it can be a quandary in your mind.
Well, let's talk about something I was meaning to talk about. But this has been great. I mean, really. I mean, this is
this has been fascinating.
It really has. But I do want to ask you about the New Mexico Observatory.
Oh,
but all that brouhaha over that. I know that you kept up with that pretty well. What was going on.
I do not think there's anything to it. Yeah, and I haven't talked about it in a few months because there's really nothing. I mean, if anybody's still out there making hay out of this, I think it's totally dropped. Yeah. I hope so, because there's nothing to it. Look, my source, I can say it, I won't identify him by name, but my source was personally close to folks who know the guy who was arrested and I'll leave it at that. And I had heard about that before it was announced. When I said in my videos, look, folks, I've been told it is a criminal law enforcement situation, I was told specifically about the guy having downloaded the porn. And I knew about that from my source when I made that video before it was announced. And that's why I was trying to say, hey, folks, seriously, and of course I have my FBI sources and local law enforcement sources in New Mexico and such that, but people wanted to run with it. People wanted it. We've gotten to that point where people want everything that comes along to be the big real thing.
Yeah.
And so they're willing to just, it's like you're making a pie and you're rolling that crust thin and you're just rolling it thinner. And that pie is not going to hold up. That crust ain't going to hold the pie, but you just roll it thinner. That's what these people are doing. And it's unfortunate.
What was it? It turned out to be that the janitor was downloading porn.
Yeah, the janitor had been downloading porn.
Did he have a gun or something? Was he trying to?
No, he flipped out and he told the people running the place that there was a madman, a killer on the loose on the site.
Okay.
And so,
was that to try to deflect from?
He was from looking him up. Yeah, exactly. And then what happened was the FBI agent who had been investigating a child porn ring in New Mexico found a digital connection between what the guy was doing and what the ring used. And so, that's why the FBI was keenly interested in what was going on up there. And the whole thing, I mean, and God forbid they flew a helicopter up there. You know how this community is about helicopters.
Was it black?
Yes, it was a dark operational helicopter. And it's like, oh my God, let a helicopter be involved. And, what gets me is this was one of those stories where all the cocky loudmouths come out. Well, I know better than you. I know what's going on up there. You're a fool. And it's really, and then of course, with time, we see that it's nothing what the know-it-alls say it was. And it was, the more, and I'm putting quotes around the word mundane, because what that idiot was doing is not a mundane thing. But yeah, it was much more a gritty, real world crime. And the guy spun up. And then people were making a big deal about, the town was closed down and the post office.
Right.
Okay, I've been up there. I've been through
What's that place
area.
called? I can't remember the name of it.
Sunspot. Yeah, see, I can remember. Sunspot. Yeah. Okay, the so-called town is essentially part of the site. Okay, and it was built up to support the people who were working at the site when it was first built, because even today, the nearest real town, I think, is 20 miles away. Okay, and when you're snowed in up there, well, you do the math. When you're snowed in at the top of that mountain, 20 miles, forget about it. So that's why the town built up, and there was a post office there, and so it was just really not the thing that people thought it was, or some people were hoping it would be. And then, you had all the people who do what I do a lot of the time, come in and analyze what's in the area. Let's look at this big picture. And I did that. I considered all that. But on this one, folks, I was able to be full journalist mode, and I happened to have personal sources that could fill me in on what was going on with this. And, it's just what it is.
Walter, do you have any thoughts on the latest stuff with TTSA? Or to the stars?
Just that I continue to think that it's BS. I think that it's a big, they started a media company. It's great. They want to do books, TV shows, and movies. I'm all for that. I mean, we all love this, UFOs and related things. And as far as I'm concerned, even when there's bad ones, you can't have too many, because it's cool. We'll find the good ones and we pick them out from the bad. But, as far as the whole TTSA, the fanboy worship, and they are going to usher in disclosure. Well, you know what? I think it's been over a year now, or about a year, that they announced their existence. From what I understand, to essentially an empty theater that, they had cameras set up in. They made it look like some people gave the impression that it was in front of an audience, and apparently it wasn't. I don't know.
Blink-182 fans.
Yeah, but here's what I think right now. I've honestly come, after this last year, I've come to the position. I really do think Tom DeLonge himself is sincere. Okay?
Sure,
I think he started this with...
I think that too, yeah.
Absolutely. Let me put it this way. I suspect that some spook agency guys playing perception management games got the best of him, and they're the ones that have their tendrils into his organization. And they're really the ones that are, kind of pulling the strings and making stuff happen where real world, so to speak, UFO stuff is going on, and the conversation. That's what I think is going on with it. And I still am convinced that Luis Elizondo is a contract employee of the CIA working operationally with TTSA. That's my suspicion. That's my big speculation out on a limb. That's what I think's going on with Elizondo. He retired on a Friday, started right up on a Monday as a contractor for the CIA.
You know this stuff because you used to be in that world.
I worked in that world, and I know exactly how that works. Okay, when I talk about the contractor relationship thing, that's not speculation on my part. Okay, I know how that works. I worked with these people who did that. Okay. And it is a fact. It's a real thing. And, let somebody say, oh, you're giving away trade secrets. Kiss my ass. Every movie in Hollywood gives away, and the spy world gives away trade secrets. So, what the hell? Yeah. It's what gets you in trouble is when you specify things that are entities that are undercover and people that are undercover. That's where you get in trouble. The fact that they do this is, that's not the thing. So that's what I personally, right now, unless I'm convinced otherwise, that's my number one suspicion about Elizondo. And also the fact that he's a contractor instead of a staff employee, he now has the freedom where if he gets himself made a big luminary in the UFO media world, he's allowed to do that, and since he's retired, and he can augment his income if he becomes a big star of his own reality show, which I think they're getting ready to come out with. Well, okay, that's gravy. Okay, that's icing on his cake. Mm-hmm. But his cake, I suspect, is working as a contract employee for the CIA, taking direction from them in what gets released, revealed, disclosed. And I think that's what TTSA is up to.
Notice how nobody is there's nobody from your old organization, the AFOSI. Nobody involved there either. Like it's CIA people.
Yes, it's CIA people. It's CIA people. Kit Green's in the mix. We remember, in Mirage Men, Kit Green was the only American that those guys loved. The rest of us were a bunch of dastardly, creepy, lying a-holes, standing single-handedly between the public and the truth about ETs. I mean, please. But they loved Kit Green.
Do you think that has some kind of inter-agency rivalry aspect to it there, Walter? Like people in the CIA, they don't respect military intelligence people?
Well, yeah. Most of the on-the-ground CIA people, really most of the on-the-ground CIA people I ever worked with, they're not like that. Yeah. Here's where the assholes in the Central Intelligence Agency are, okay? They're at Langley. They're usually sitting at a desk. They're analysts. They're middle management, maybe upper management types, okay? That's where you find those who perceive themselves as blue bloods, who look down on everybody. So, that's the kind of people essentially we're talking about. But also remember, in the case of like Mirage Men, they're Brits. Okay, they're British guys who made that. Okay, and there's Brits in the, not all, because we know a lot of cool Brits, Nick Redfern and stuff, and other people. But there's some of these British guys, they just hate the U.S. military. Okay, so especially if you're U.S. military intel, counterintel, whatever, you're the bad guy. But apparently they have no problem with CIA. But they don't like, and they particularly don't like Air Force. Because, the evil Air Force OSI is the organization, as I said before, that's blocking disclosure to all the people. I mean, there's people who believe that, and they play to that.
It's like, come on, guys, Yorktown was over 200 years ago. It's time to...
Yeah, Yorktown, and I'm sorry that the War of 1812 didn't get back your real estate either. It's good God.
Well, you can thank good old Andrew Jackson for that one.
Yeah, don't get me started on 19th century England. Good Lord. It is what it is, and people have to recognize it. But it's a bunch of it's from what I understand, more than one CIA psychiatry division, so to speak, that's involved with TTSA. Well, come on, this is the division that came up with MK Ultra or developed it from what the Nazis had started growing it to.
What's this whole alloys thing? With
that's what?
Alloys, the metal alloys. Like, what metal alloys are they talking about? Like, TTSA comes out with this stuff that they've got metal alloys from spacecraft. or suppose.
Well, didn't Bigelow say that he was aware of something like that too, or
yeah, I think he did.
They were storing it. They always dance with stuff like that because there's these weird alloys. Well, if you look closely, you're going to come to find out that sure there might be some interesting alloy, but you're going to find that it's something that its origin is very earthbound. That it was probably just developed by very earthbound organizations on some type of classified or proprietary level. And that's what was used in whatever it was that actually crashed, that they retrieved. And what they like to do, remember, they're playing to their audience. They're playing to their audience, but they never quite come out and confirm that it's extraterrestrial or otherworldly. They just play with the question like, I don't know. What do you think it could be? And they know that this community, the people out there that just, suck on the teat of mystery, just love to hear that. It's like, give me more. And, keep it vague, because if you keep it vague, you never really have to give an answer. You never have to have that adult moment where you realize, or you have to come to a conclusion or you have to accept that something's not what the child in you wants it to be. See, that's why they keep it vague. And that's an old, manipulation and handling trick. That's every time Luis Elizondo dances around when pushed about, hey, is it ET or he's just employing, it could be, it's a tactic. I'm telling you. And that's what they're doing. And there's people that are just eating it up. And I have to say that, most of them, not all of them, but most of them that are in the TTSA fan box, I hate to say it, are guys that are, younger than us, that haven't been around long enough to know the basic history of ufology and all the other crap that's come before. And they get all mad at you. There's one guy in particular that gets his panties in a bunch, who says he knows all that stuff, but they sure don't act like they do, because they'd be a lot more wary of TTSA if they really had a grasp on all the other tomfoolery that's come along before this.
Yeah. I mean, you have to look at the history. You have to look at what intelligence agencies have done. You have to look at the history of, in particular, of how the UFO meme, this whole idea, has been used to cover up craft in the past. And I've said it many times, is that I believe what's really going on is this push to militarize space. And that now we can have this as like a smoke screen. So now when we see something weird, unusual, people will say, oh, well, it's some unknown thing. We don't know what it is, but it couldn't possibly be ours. I think that's where this is going.
And then that's another situation where it could be both. It could be, they're trying to push for the militarization of space, but there could be stuff there that isn't ours. And then that gets into, okay, so is therefore in that fact that that possible fact that there could be something that's not ours, is what I'm stumbling. Is that what's driving the need for the militarization?
Yeah, definitely. When we talk about all the
not.
other stuff you've written about with in Origin and the whole secret space program idea.
I think we've had a classified manned space program since the 50s. Now, I'm not saying it's Starfleet. I'm saying it was pretty much parallel to what we saw NASA doing. No, none of that. Hell no. And it's up there. I think it's up there. But when we talk the militarization, we're talking about an open, everybody knows about it, Space Force kind of thing where, it becomes obvious that we have one. And for the record, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm all for this. I'm all for if there's, if I'm right about, I and others are right about a classified manned space program, secret space program. I have no problem with it existing at all. And Space Force, please, God, bring it on. because that's totally cool. Because I, for one, think, folks, for those out there who are the nesters, okay, that want to weave baskets and, cook pumpkin and avocado salads and things like that, and, gather eggs. I know they don't like the idea of Space Force, but, it's inevitable. Where I was going with this was, it's inevitable. Humankind, the majority of us, essentially, it's inevitable. A bunch of us are going to leave this planet as soon as we can and go to other worlds. I think a bunch of us, our ancestors came from other worlds. I think it's the way of things. Okay, so this is just a natural, as we attain space travel with the civilization we have, it's going to be inevitable. A bunch of us are going to be like, hey, let's go to the next world. And space travel is just going to become a normal thing.
We better do it quick.
Why?
Because things aren't looking too good.
Oh, you mean like the planet dying in some cataclysm?
I mean, just the Earth becoming...
I think just the end of civilization is more likely.
Oh, you guys are. That's another teat that people like to suck on.
The climate change stuff.
Oh, please. What did they come out with recently? The report, that science was bullshit too. I mean, folks, that's look. Have there been cataclysms before? Yeah. Will there be another cataclysm? Probably. But what we got to do is we don't know when that's going to happen. An asteroid could slam us right now and screw things up. Yeah, sure. But essentially, short of that, I think we're going to have plenty of time to get this thing off the ground, and as we should. And I just think that, the nesters need to calm down, because it's going to serve their desires. If most people want to get on rocket ships and leave this planet, then it reduces the population, and then all the nesters can have their happy garden.
Aren't we just going to start fighting over space, and then we won't get anywhere because we'll just be fighting each other in space?
We got more room to fight, though.
But first, there's going to be so much space, and everybody can just get off this planet and go to their own world. Okay.
Well, there's a lot of resources on Earth too, but we don't, split them up and figure it out with each other.
Yeah, well, that's another reason why we need to get off this planet, to get out from each other's, get out of each other's hair. We're just trying to look at this. We all want to cram into metropolitan areas, okay? And you got a bunch of people that, let's face it, have different philosophical outlooks,
right?
Okay, that we're forcing cultures that really, are just better off leaving each other the hell alone to live together and deal with each other. Well, one thing out of many that space travel will do, opening it up to the masses, is to allow people to spread out a little bit again, okay? And this group that worships God this way and things like this, they can go off and do their own planet. And the group that hates them so much, they can go off in the other direction and do their own planet. The problem is when you have these insidious, nefarious human beings that it just sends, flaming lightning up their ass to think that they can't tell someone else what to do and how to do it. Okay? That's where the problem comes in. Okay? Is all the collectivists, all the hive minders. It just burns them to think that somebody doesn't want to live the way they want to live, and somebody thinks differently than they do, and they've got to, can't let you go. They got to control you. That's where the problem is.
Well, yeah, what you're talking about is this idea of individualism versus collectivism, and this whole idea that, 400 years ago when we had a lower population on this planet and people could escape somewhere.
Yeah. And space is going to allow us to do that
own, and have their, they put space between themselves, and if they had a disagreement, you went somewhere else.
You went somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Right. Especially early America.
That's the idea of the frontier.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what a frontier is, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And believe me, I'm definitely in the camp of individualism. I'm definitely in the camp of collectivism can rot in hell, and that's a war that I'll gladly fight as staunchly and viciously as needs to be fought.
No, I mean, I agree with you, Walter.
I'm
an individualist too.
Yeah, that's going to drive a lot of the masses going to space, because you got a lot of people that are fed up with this collectivist crap being forced down their throats. Okay, and if they have, but it's going to come down to this. It's going to come down to this. The next major conflict in the world is going to truly be the war between the collectivist and the individualist philosophy. Okay, now, if we want to avoid this, then both sides need to be pushing for the masses to be able to travel into space, because that will alleviate and prevent it.
I mean, how are the masses going to be the ones to go to outer space, though?
It's going to happen eventually. It's going to happen eventually. Yes, it's going to start.
Do you think that privatization will encourage that?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, you're going to have these privatization. Commerce is going to go out in space, and what are they going to need? They're going to need people to work the mines. They're not going to be able to do everything automated and robots forever or completely. Okay, they're gonna need people to do things. So therefore, what are they going to do? They're going to do it like they did in the old days. They're going to colonize. Okay, now here comes the people saying, "Oh, but what about the people who already live on the other planets?" Okay, we have discussed the mistakes that were made in colonization in our history. Okay, there are ways to colonize without making those same mistakes. Okay, so we got to have faith. We got to have a little faith that we've learned from our lessons. And the cynics and the naysayers and the baby whiners who just insist that we'll never learn, we just need to kind of put a bottle in their mouth, tell them to shut up, and proceed with, life and reality. At some point, the whiners and foot stompers, just need to be told to shut up and get out of the way, of people getting stuff done.
On that note, I think that's a good place to end it. Walter, real quick, tell
everyone. I pissed off.
I'll let you know.
Get some interest.
I'll let you know. I'll just direct them all to you.
Yeah, you're going to get some interesting comments on this one, I'm sure. That son of a bitch.
Tell everybody where they can find your books, and also your web presence, and an update on what's going on with Empire of the Will, the series.
Yes. The Empire of the Will TV series development continues. It's just in that early. It's being worked by the producer and the writer. What they're doing is they're fine tuning the script for the pilot. Is what they're doing. And being a writer, I understand how that is. You want that to be as perfect as you can make it, as good as you can possibly make it, for when you go to the next step. And that's what they're doing. The writer is working on that. They're revising, doing what they need to do, all their magic. The producer's putting together, the just doing what the producer does. So it's progressing exactly the speed and the direction it's supposed to be progressing. So I'm very encouraged and excited about that. My books are only print on demand at one place, lulu.com. If you go to lulu.com, lulu.com, and you put in my name or the title of one of my books, it'll bring you to my what's called the Author Spotlight. That's my publishing company page. My fiction is there too, so make sure you look at the description of the books. But my fiction, my pulp fiction, as well as the nonfiction books that I write are there. I also have the blog, empireofthewheel.blogspot.com, which I update with essays and commentary every once in a while. I will hopefully be doing more of that soon. And that's really... I also have the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube that folks can follow me there and check that out. So
I actually got to appear on one of the videos.
Yes, that's right.
Over there by Cora Stanton's grave.
Yeah, I didn't have my phone turned the right way, so it's sideways, but what the hell?
Well, excellent. Walter, thank you so much. We're going to close this section out, but we'll be right back to close out this longer than usual show on Conspirinormal. So that was a very long show.
Very long, very deep.
Yeah. I want to thank Dr. Wysong for coming on in the first part, and I want to thank Walter Bosley coming on in the second part. Decided on this one that I wanted to do an extra length show for the audience out there, and we did a Patreon segment with Walter, where we read an interesting story that Serfiel found that we are going to talk about in a later episode. But for now, as Patreons, which we got 2 more over the weekend.
Oh, awesome.
We are using to give you something a little bit special and a little bit in advance. So, Serfiel, what's your thoughts about what you heard from Walter there?
Oh, it was real cool. I know the conversation kind of took a life of its own, and we kind of went down a lot of different avenues. So I was not expecting that, but those are some of my favorite aspects of his writing. So it was a great show.
Because we wanted to talk about, primarily I wanted to talk about the secret space program stuff, Corey Good trying to copyright the secret space program phrasing as his own, that he was going to copyright that. But we didn't get to talk about that. We went down this kind of like esoteric rabbit hole. So I'm real happy that we did that.
He probably doesn't need any more attention.
Yeah, that's true. I would pretty much say so. So I think we're going to wrap it up there, guys. Next time we've got Timothy Renner coming on. And I also do want to thank those 2 new Patreons that we got. One was Glenn and also Catherine. So
thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for being aboard. And you're going to get something pretty much right away with this show. I hope that you're enjoying the rest of the stuff that we have on there, and there's a lot there. So if someone wants to go and become a Patreon, support the show, go to www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal. And also, if you want to leave a one-time donation, which we don't get very many of those, that's at our website, www.conspirinormal.com. And that goes to our own account. So if you don't want the recurring fee. So is there anything else that you wanted to add, Serfiel, for this show? Or?
Oh, no, not much. Just, please help us out. We Studio B needs some upgrades. So.
Studio B does need some upgrades. Next week, we probably should be over at Rob's, I think. We'll try to keep him awake. But I'm real excited to be talking to Timothy Renner. And join us next week, guys, for another fun, action-packed episode of Conspirinormal.